I hit the live button and it looks like it's working.
Go, Valerie, go.
All righty, it's showing that we're okay. Got it, got it, got it, got it. All right. All right. So there are three other people who are waiting to join. All right, so we've got everybody here. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. Some of you may know me and others don't know me. My name is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. Nonprofit Utopia is the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and I'm happy to see a couple of our members. I see Rick Goodell, I see Kim Wright, and I can't see everybody, but those are the folks that I see, and I thank everybody for joining us. So this is Nonprofit and Social Good Technology Month here in the Nonprofit Utopia community, and we're doing this in partnership with Net Impact Chicago and Whitfly here, and we're going to have a whole month of activities, and this is our very first activity. And what we're trying to do is demystify technology and share ways that we can integrate technology into our day-to-day activities as nonprofit leaders, as small business owners. And I know, with small shops, we tend to get a little bit afraid and we don't always have people who are tech savvy. But at the same time, not only did we want to learn how to integrate technology into our day-to-day operations, we wanted to um, give you a practical overview of technology and not necessarily from a technical perspective. Alrighty, so today we're going to be focusing on how to use technology to design evidence-based programs. So we've got a program today and we've got one tomorrow, but today we are focusing on the program logic model, which, as you may know, is the basis of any evidence-based program design. And our guests today are Nancy Snow and Beth Snow. They have designed a wonderful platform and they're going to give us an overview of how that works, as well as an overview of program logic models. And I will let them come to you in their own way. Beth is the head of program evaluation at the Center for Health Evaluation and Outcome Sciences, I think. And Nancy is a professor with OCAD University in Toronto. So Nancy is coming to us from Toronto and Beth is coming to us from Vancouver. And without further ado, if there's anything that I got wrong, they can feel free to correct it, but I would really love to hear more from them. Let them give you an overview of their background and how they came to design the software. So between Nancy and Beth, I'll let you guys decide who goes first, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Valerie. Hi, I'm Nancy Snow, and I'm the eldest sibling, so I guess that means I get to go first. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share my screen here. We're going to do a little bit of an intro. I'm going to do that. Then Beth is going to discuss briefly what a program logic model is, talk a little bit about what that means in theory of change, just a little tiny bit. And then we're going to shift over into a live demo.
Oh,
So
awesome.
if that sounds agreeable to everybody, that's how we're going to do this. Okay, so we'll start off here and we'll go through. Everybody can see my slides, yeah?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, okay. So let's get started. So how I like to start off is with a land acknowledgement. So I'm coming to you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I'd like to acknowledge that I know we're not all sitting on the same lands, but where I sit is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. I'd like to recognize that this land is also the home to many diverse Indigenous communities. And I'm grateful to be able to work on this land, teach, share, learn, and be with my community and be with my family. So I'd like to start that off. And I think that's an important way to recognize who we are and where we sit. Beth, I'm just going to get you to come on and say yours, please.
Sure. So I am very lucky to live, work, and play in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. Right now I'm in New Westminster, British Columbia, which is traditionally the land of the Kakite Nation.
Great. Thanks, Beth. And so what we want to do is we just want to tell you a little bit about who we are. We are sisters. And, you know, we have I guess a typical sister relationship. We like to, we grew up together. We like to play as children. We're always inventing things. But we both took very different paths in our lives. But it's so interesting how we take different paths, but how they intersect. So I have a creative background. I'm a designer. And Beth is a scientist. So we both come to the world with and bring different skill sets and gifts. And what we were finding was Beth kept reaching out to me to say, you know, I'm making these program logic models and they're really complicated. They're massive. They have huge components. They're very complex. And I don't have any way to do this. Like, there's got to be a better way than printing out these massive posters and wander through all these different links. Sometimes there's hundreds of components that all have these different relationships, and it really can be quite complicated to present and share certain components of a project. So we kept recommending different software, different things. And so finally I said, you know, like, why don't we make our own? So this is where actually my partner comes in. My partner is a developer. Actually, he's signed on right now too. You see Jeff Cramp out there. He's the developer for this. And so, as you know, as most things go in our house, I have an idea and I say, well, we're going to do this, but really it means him. So I come up with ideas and then he helps us make them happen. So the reason this picture, you can see a Christmas tree in the background, is because at our family, we celebrate Christmas. And so Beth was in for the holiday, and much to the chagrin of our poor mother, we put the dinner in, we pushed the dishes aside, and we actually, huge pieces of paper and sticky notes, and we actually developed the core of the model while we waited for our dinner to cook. So that's how we got started. It took us about 6 months of development to put it together, testing. We did some user testing. I was so grateful for several people in Beth's office who tested out components, tested out our logic. We did paper prototyping and all these kinds of things to really see how we could develop something that was easy for people to use. We found a lot of the programs, you had to code with them, which was just not conducive to most people's needs. So we thought, well, let's try to do something really intuitive. And we ended up testing it out again. We did some workshops at the Canadian Evaluation Society in St. John's at their event in 2016. And we rolled out a little more fully. We did a paper presentation in Australia. And then we've had users they've been giving us feedback ever since. So the version we're going to show you today is actually version 2. We've upgraded it. We've made it a little more intuitive, and we'll show you how to go through that. So that's sort of our journey to get here. And we're looking forward to sharing it with you. Next, what we'll do is Beth is going to give us a little brief kind of talk around what logic models are. Beth, do you want me to click for you, or do you want to share your screen for this part?
I'll just get you to click.
Okay, so just
so
your eyebrow or something.
So just so that we're all on the same page, because I know oftentimes people use the same words to mean different things. We're gonna just talk a bit about what logic models are, and then we can go into the demo of the software. So a logic model is really a visual representation of your program. It shows the relationship between what you do and what you're hoping to get out of what you do. So there's different forms that logic models can take. Often it's sort of boxes and arrows. So in this little diagram here, we can see, we have different boxes for inputs. So that could be the resources to run your program. Maybe it's equipment, staff, curriculum, whatever things you need to do your work. Activities are those things your program does. Outputs are the sort of direct result of what you do. So if you do a training workshop, the result of that is people are trained. And then the outcome is what happens beyond that. So, you know, once people are trained, maybe they know something they didn't know before. Maybe they have a new skill. Maybe they go on to apply that skill. And ultimately, you know, they use that skill to do something good in the world. Maybe it's improve health outcomes, improve disease rates, get people into housing, whatever it is that you do. The reason you get up in the morning and go do your job, that's where we get to with outcomes. And then another really important part of logic models are these arrows. So the arrows represent the if-then logic between that link these things. So if we have this input, then we can do this activity. If we have this activity, then we'll get this outcome. And if we get, or sorry, output, and then if we get this output, we're hoping to get this outcome. So it sort of represents a theory. When you're developing your program, you can use a logic model to think about, you know, what are we doing and how might it get us to where we're going, to make sure that the activities you're doing are actually adding the value you want, or at least in theory are. And then also, you know, that all the things you're trying to achieve, you're actually doing something to develop them. So I think we want the next slide. So a logic model obviously, you know, isn't just going to be, things in life aren't just straight, linear, simple things. So if you can go to the next slide there, Nance. So a logic model will be more complicated than just, you know, simple lines. You might have, you know, an input that's used for multiple activities, or maybe one output leads to several of our outcomes. And these can get really complicated. The program I was working on, when I said to Nancy, like, help me find software that will make my life easier, it literally took up a wall. Like, we had a poster, there were hundreds of things in it. It was really complex. But the basic logic of like, if this, then that, is really sort of the core of a logic model. So just to give a really simple example, if I have food, that's my input, then I do the activity of eating the food. The output of eating food is my belly is full of food. And then the outcome is I don't feel hungry anymore. So I find sometimes it's helpful to kind of do a little simple example to make it a little more concrete, because all this jargon of like inputs, outputs, it gets a little, you know, taxing sometimes. So then if you flip just to the next slide. Oh, yeah, I have my if-thens. And one more slide. Okay, so, oh, that didn't, keep going. I think you went backwards. There we go. So the other last sort of thing I wanted to mention was logic models versus program theory. So there's lots of debate among evaluators about to what extent a logic model is or is not a program theory. The way I like to look at it is that the logic model is this nice graphic representation of this logical sequence of activities. But theory of change goes a little bit further than that. So theory of change actually gets into causal mechanisms. So when we're doing planning our programs or evaluating our programs, we want to know that what we're doing is actually causing these changes, not just that they happen in order. So a theory of change might have causal mechanisms written into the theory. You might have things like preconditions necessary to get to that outcome, or assumptions, and all of these things could be sort of added to make a more fulsome theory. And again, you could kind of test out, you know, the extent to which that theory really holds. And a logic model or a program theory can be helpful in doing that evaluation, because then we kind of know what we're looking for. Like, did these outcomes happen? Were these causal mechanisms in place? So our software was designed originally to develop program logic models, but I can show you a bit when we do the demo, sort of how some elements of theory of change could actually be included if you're interested in that. And I think with that, I will move on to actually demoing the software. So I'm gonna share my screen. And if you do have any questions or comments throughout, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll address them. So you should be able to see on my screen our website where our software is. So the address, dylomo.com, I think it's in the chat as well. So this is sort of our landing page of what you'll see if you go to dylomo.com. So the first thing you're going to want to do is sign up for free. Or if you have an account, you can click log in. So I have an account. There's 3 ways that you can log in. You can sign up for an account with your email, or if you use Google or Facebook, you can just use those to authenticate yourself and get into the software that way. So I have signed up with email, so I will log in here, and then I get my password. And now I'm in my account. Up at the top, there's sort of 2 main options. You can go look at your logic models. There's also a support page that I'll touch on later. And on this page will be any logic models that you've created. So for this demo, I'm going to kind of use an example model that I already have created to give you sort of the overview of the general features. And then I'll do a little demo to show you how to create your own logic model. So I have this nutritional education program model that I've created. I'll just click on that and it brings me to my logic model. So you can see it's, again, the arrows and the boxes. In this software, we have different types of elements. So that idea of the input, the activity, the output. And in this, I actually have short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes, and they're all color coded so that when you look at it, it's kind of easy to see what's which box is which type of element. You can customize all that. So you can make whatever colors you like. You can make whatever categories you like. So again, people that use different words when they make logic models and theories of change. So you can use whichever ones you want. We have some common ones that are coded in there, but that you can just click on, but you can also make whatever you like. As well, these arrows, you can customize those. So you can make them different colors and call them different things. Right now, I'm in sort of the build mode. So this is the big canvas you have that you can start dropping things onto and creating those boxes and arrows. We also have a presentation mode. So over on the left, there's a menu bar. If you hover over it, you'll see the various different options, and I'll walk through those. So here we have this presentation mode. So if I click on that, it gives you a little message to let you know when you're presenting, you can't actually change anything. So this is really handy if you're working with your stakeholders, you want to show them a logic model. That way you don't have to worry about accidentally moving something. So I'll click got it, and then it'll make a nice big full screen version. If you want to zoom in or out, you can use whatever way you normally zoom in and out. So I have a wheel on my mouse that I can use to zoom in or out. If you have a touch screen, you can use the pinching motions. Whatever you normally do to zoom in or out will work. So if you want to zoom in and see things more clearly. And another feature that's really handy, well, it's zoomed a little too far, with the presentation mode is if you hover over any box, it will just show you the things that are attached in some way to that box. Because this one's a pretty simple logic model, but if you get a really complicated one with dozens and dozens of boxes, it can be hard to sort of, see the forest for the trees. So in this example, one of my inputs is dietitian. So it's a nutrition education program. I need some dietitians. If I want to know, okay, what part of the program are dietitians involved in, I hover over it, and then anything that's not to do with them disappears. So it just makes it a little bit cleaner to look at. And you go, okay, I can see there's sort of 2 main activities they do, and these are the outcomes that they're going to lead to. So that's, I think, probably one of my favorite things in this. Because I have spent a lot of time working with stakeholders and trying to explain logic models to them. And this has made my life a lot easier to do that. To get back to the build mode, you can either click this X up in the corner, or you can hit escape on your keyboard. Either one will take you back to build mode. Some of the things you can do in build mode are arrange the elements in different ways. So right now, this is in what we call static mode. So it's set up in that traditional format of, a column for inputs, a column for activities. But depending how your things are connected, sometimes the arrows end up like all crammed together and it's kind of hard to see. So you can switch it to dynamic mode. And in this mode, the software will kind of spread things out a little bit more and make things a little bit easier to see. And if you move things around, you can see it kind of bounces around and tries to figure out for you what's the most sort of spread out, but not so spread out that you can't read anything anymore. If you want to have more control over exactly where things get placed, there's right now it's enabled. It's called Snap to Grid. So you grab something and you move it, and it's going to stay where you put it. But you can also, there we go. If you disable the snap mode, it kind of goes all wherever. If you enable snap mode, it stays exactly where you put it. So just giving you some different options to arrange things on the screen, whatever way works best for you. There's also a dark mode, which can be nice for presenting, where this background goes black, and you can play with all the colors of the boxes too to make it look sort of the way you want it, but that can be a nice option as well. And then ever important, the save button up here. So while you're building it, make sure you're saving. There will be, you can see down at the bottom, there's a notice that reminds you like, oh, you haven't saved this. So definitely want to save it. And then our feature here was probably the biggest request we got from our first version of the software, which is export. So people would build these nice models online, and then they'd say, how do I put this in my report? Or how do I print this up? And before it was like, you had to take a screenshot. So this new version has an export button. You click on that and you can save your logic model in a nice image file, so you can do whatever you want with it. And we actually have it set up so there's different qualities. So if you are wanting to email it, you might make it a low quality version so it isn't such a huge file. But if you do want to print it up in a big format, this high quality is super, super high quality. So that is, I'm really excited that we have that feature now, because that will make people's lives a lot easier. So that's sort of the big kind of lay of the land. And now I will show you how to make one of these logic models yourself. So I'll click back here on logic models to go to this original page. And there's this blue box here, create a new model, click that. And now it brings up a little menu to get you started. So you give your logic model a title. You can give it a description. Continue. And here is where you get to pick the category. So these are the types of boxes you want to have. Click on add a new category. You can click any option. So these are the ones that are kind of built in: activities, outputs, outcomes, impacts, whatever, goal, whatever you want to call them. And then you can add a custom category. So you could put in assumptions, maybe, if you want to say, what are the assumptions that are leading in some of these things? Dylomo will automatically assign it a color. But if you don't like that color, just click on it and click change color, and you can pick whatever color you want. Oops. Down at the bottom, there is our sort of palette of standard colors that we've used, but you're free to use any color that you like. You can also round the corners. So if you want to have some boxes that are a slightly different shape, that's an option too. Click set. And now that is your new category. So you can pick as many or as few as you want. Also, this order is the order they will appear in the static mode. So the columns are in this order when it automatically assigns static mode for you. So if you want to change that, if you wanted impact to be at the end, you just drag it over in this screen, and then that becomes the order you get. Continue. For relationships, so these are the arrows, same thing, click the add button, and we have two that are sort of built in. We call them absolute and contributing. So, an absolute would be like a hard dependency, like you absolutely must have this to get that. Contributing is a nice to have. If you have this, it might add to this outcome. But again, you can add any name you want, and you can format it how you like as well. So, for example, if you wanted to do more of a theory of change, you might want to say something like, oh, this is an evidence-based relationship. I know from research that if I do this, this is going to happen. Whereas I'm going to add this new thing. It's never been tested. I may put in, it's a theoretical link, and I'm going to test it out in my program. So that's one sort of example how you might want to add different types of relationships, and they can be formatted differently. So when you're looking at it, you can see, oh, here's all the evidence-based ones. Here's all the theoretical ones. Just like the categories, you can click on the name and change the formatting. So you can have solid lines, dashed lines, or dotted lines, just to give you some visual differentiation. The animation of that like arrow looking like it's moving, you can change it from slow to medium or fast, or have none. And again, you can pick whatever color you like and click set. Oh, that didn't take color. There we go, and set. And now when you build your logic model, you get to choose which type of relationship you add in, and you'll see it will look different. Continue again. Sharing and collaboration. This was another big request that we got in the first version of our software. When you logged in, only you could see your logic models, and the only way to share it was either to take a picture of it or to give someone else your login, which it's not ideal thing to do. So now there's a sharing mode. In order to share your logic model with someone else, you would click this make the logic model public, and that will allow you to share the link to your logic model with someone else. So if you do select this, anybody who has the link can see your logic model. They can't change anything on it, but they can see it. You can change this at any time by coming back to this menu. So if you want to just build it privately and not share it, and then when it's ready, you can come back and make it public later. Or if you make it public now, you can go and unclick this box later if you decide you don't want it to be shareable anymore. So I will click done, and a menu box pops up to allow us to start adding things to our logic model. So category, these are those categories that I chose. So maybe I want to add a resource. Type in whatever you like. Maybe my resources, I need some staff. So now that's going to appear on my logic model. This plus button down in the bottom right is how you add more. So maybe this time I want to add an activity. Maybe the activity is teaching workshops. Click add there. So it just keeps adding to our canvas. Then I want to have an output. My output is number of workshops held. And I'll throw one more on for an impact, increased knowledge. So right now it's in that sort of dynamic mode. So things are just going to appear on the canvas wherever. If I want to have it in that static mode, switch to static. I can just, when I'm in static, I can't drag anything. So it's put it in those columns. And since I had extra categories that I don't have anything for, that's why there's space there. I can also switch it back to dynamic and do that snap to grid. And then it's going to let me move things by just dragging and dropping them. And it'll also sort of auto zoom to show you what's on the screen. To create a relationship, when you hover over any box, there's a little icon here for a link. Click that, and then just drag over and click to whatever box you want it to connect to. It's going to ask what type of relationship I want to add. Maybe I'm going to say this is an evidence-based relationship. Click add relationship, and there's your arrow. And you can just keep doing that whichever way, with whichever type of relationship you want. You can go any direction. And you add all the arrows of whatever type you want. You can move things around however you like. If you find you want to delete an arrow, the way to do that is to click on the box, double click on the box for that element. This is how you can edit it as well. So if I decide I want to change the name of this or even change the category, I can do that there. And then to change relationships, you just click on this relationships button, and it shows me the list of everything it's attached to. And there's a delete button. So if I want to get rid of that one, click that, flip it back over, click update, and there goes that arrow. So you can we tried to make it as intuitive as possible, a lot of clicking and dragging and dropping. Trying to see if there's anything else I wanted to show. Yeah, I think that, so that's sort of the basics of how you build them. And the other thing, just to mention quickly, is this support page. So if you click here, it will bring up this box. So if you have questions about anything, you can go to this support page and send us an email. So we will ultimately have a few articles linked here for common questions. So as questions come in, when we get common ones, we'll write up the answer that we'll email back to people, but then we'll put it here for anybody else who has the same question. But if your question isn't answered here, you can click contact us. Oh, something went wrong. We'll have to fix that. That's our first help, is to fix the help page.
Yeah.
But there will be a form here that allows you to say, like, oh, I found a bug in the software, or there's a feature I'd really like. I'd really like this to be able to do X, Y, or Z. And we'll get that email, and then we'll get back to you. So I think that's sort of the tour of how this works. Nancy, was there anything you wanted to add to that before we kind of open up to questions?
No, you've got everything on the list. What we're also going to do under that article piece, I recorded some demos as well. So that way, no one expects you to memorize this whole demo, because that's, it's sometimes you need to, ask questions in the moment. So I've recorded little demos that I'll be putting up there in that article spot shortly. Yeah. So once we, under that article piece, we'll have links to the demo. So that way, if I don't know how to figure something out, there'll be a tutorial there for you.
Okay, so what questions are there?
Yeah. I have maybe not a question, but a suggestion. To the extent that a logic is going to work, it helps to have fairly rigorous definitions of each element of the logic. And that might mean that an input gets defined fairly specifically, that an activity, that an output and an outcome, all of those might benefit from having a fairly rigorous definition, so individuals who want to use the model can go back to the definitions and test if the idea or concept or process that they're proposing meets a fairly rigorous criterion for an input, an activity, an output, or an outcome.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because people do use these words to mean different things. So if one person uses the word outcome a different way than another person, and then they go look at the model, they might be interpreting it quite differently. So having somewhere on here where you actually define how you're using those categories, I agree, would be super helpful. I see Nancy taking notes.
Yeah, I go back to an old logic model. It used to be called key factor analysis, that had a fairly rigorous set of definitions, and it started at a slightly different place in terms of thinking through what a program was about. That is, it started out with what needs of what people do you intend to meet as a first step, and then as a second step, what were the time limited and quantifiable objectives. That is, each objective was had a numerical value. It had, you could say, you wanted to alter 600 housing units within such and such, within 1 year, or whatever the specifics were, but to make it quantifiable. And then the program, which is kind of where you're capturing the gist of it, would be the logical result of thinking through what needs, what objectives, what goals, what programs and resources are needed. So you might broaden it to help people sharpen up their definitions of what it is they're actually doing. What are the end products, end results, end states you want to achieve by when? Now, those would normally be called outcomes. In the old key factor analysis, those were called your objectives. And program was the logical last step in a thinking process. And I'm not sure here. I think what you've done is a marvelous job in terms of illustrating steps in articulating what should happen when and how it should happen. And maybe you want to broaden it more to allow people to jump in and using a set of rigorous definitions of each element in the logic to go back and test their assumptions. Always test, test, test.
Yeah, and definitely when I build logic models, I do tend to build them from starting at the end. So you start with your long-term goal or your outcome, and then kind of go, okay, what needs to be in place? So this software kind of allows you to jump in and build it from whichever way works for you. I know often when I always build my logic models with my stakeholders, and sometimes they're very comfortable listing all their activities first. So I can kind of throw those down on the canvas and then say, okay, well, what are we trying to achieve, and then work backwards. So it's meant to also be flexible to kind of meet people where they're at.
I see that.
Yeah.
Question for you. This is Valerie. I'm just wondering, can this tool be used, I guess, as a part of a brainstorm? You know, can you use this collaboratively with several people throwing out ideas all at once to build it together? You know, you just gave me an idea when you said that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, that is it's a great question. That is one of the pieces that we want to do on the back end of the system to develop collaboratively. I feel like we've been spoiled by software like put together by places like Google. So many of us work collaboratively. I know when I write papers with colleagues, I'll hop into a Google Doc and we'll all work at the same time. So I'm typing and so-and-so's typing and this person's editing. And so that collaboration is something we're all quite comfortable with. And I know I personally love it. It's just quite complicated on the back end. So one of our goals is, because we are always want to ensure that we're providing this for free. We believe that the access to this is really important, so that people can do the work that they want to do. Not-for-profits or students, anybody who wants to build a logic model. We want to keep it. Keep it free, but we have to keep the cost down. So that's actually quite complicated, all that saving to the database and back and forth and back and forth. So we're just working on that in the back end, trying to figure out a cost-effective way to provide that feature. Personally, in my mind, I would love it if people were on their phones and then people could just add them as they went. Like in my mind, that's what I'd love, because then it is really like literally throwing sticky notes on a wall. But we're not quite there yet, but that's something we'll do. So right now it would just have to be facilitated through one person. So maybe people would have to, be online and shout them out, and a person would be there as kind of a note taker.
Well, you've done a marvelous job. This is Rick. Done a marvelous job of rendering processes in a graphical mode to allow us to see what actually are our assumptions, what are our inputs and activities, and so on. If you wanted to go to a collaborative model, one that I've used in the past, which may be subject to your graphical treatment, is the nominal group process, or Delphi technique. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Nominal group process is able to articulate the people have to think silently and respond to a primary question and put in their responses, and then the responses are tabulated. And generally, if you've got a room of 10 to 25 people, you will find at the end of the nominal group process that there will be universal agreement on one or two or three of the major suggestions, and everybody will have had a chance to get their input. That would be a marvel to put on a graphical interface like you've done.
Yeah, question. When developing this tool, thank you for walking us through this. Have you looked at Trello? I worked with an organization that used Trello for logical flow. It's a cloud-based tool, so we could all collaborate. The columns allow for, classic Kanban style thinking and process matriculation from column to column, but it could also be used, each column could be its own process. You can have several activities within that process, and the whole team could work together in order to not only develop the columns, but the cards that would be populated in those columns. Is Trello something that you've been looking at for reference?
So I think for me, a really important part of the logic model is those links between the columns. And I'm not aware of a way you could show the logical flow between the columns in Trello, like between the individual items in the columns, rather than just saying like this column leads to this column. Like those individual links, I think would be where it wouldn't work for the way I work anyway. But I could see maybe like for the collaborative, again, like until we can figure out a collaborative mode where everyone can work on the same thing at the same time, people could put their ideas into Trello. And then again, you'd need a note taker to put it here and then do that linking piece.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I have a question. First, also thank you for showing this and putting this together. This is a really incredible resource. I'm playing with it right now, and I think a lot in mind maps, and this is really helpful to be able to use. I have two questions. They're unrelated. The first is kind of on that category piece. If you could describe the difference between an output and an outcome, and also resource and input, and then.
Sure.
If you can take stack on this, my second question is, I saw the sharing is to make it public, but just accessible by link. What is the privacy of the data? What are the kind of privacy terms once you put data on this page? How is that protected?
Great questions. I'll tackle the first one, Nat, and then Nancy, if you can tackle the second one. Resources and inputs are really just synonyms. So when we looked at how people were building logic models, some people just like the word input and some people just like the word resource. They seem to be pretty commonly used. So we've put them both in there, but they really just mean any kind of thing that is needed to do your work. So time, people, equipment, whatever it is. Outputs and outcomes are often sort of mixed up because they are very similar. So the way that I use outputs is to be sort of the direct, tangible, quantifiable thing that results from whatever your activity is. So it's a change to something that you have pretty direct control over. So if your activity is that you teach a workshop, the output, the direct result is the number of people who get taught or the number of workshops that you hold. Whereas an outcome is a change to someone or something else. So what happens to those people who took the workshop? Well, they gained new knowledge or they gained new skills, or then they went off and used that skill in their work. So sort of the more, a little bit further away than what you have direct control over. So that's how I use output and outcome. But I think it goes back to Rick's point. Other people may use them differently. So probably a good idea to have a definition for how you're using them so that when you're working with other people and they're looking at your logic model, they understand what you mean by it in your model. And then Nancy, do you want to talk about the privacy element?
Yeah, so what it is the data is securely stored and only the author has access to it. So you're the only one who has access to that data. So by you sharing the link, the link is only a view, so they won't be able to edit it, anything like that. So it is and secure. It's secure in that sense. And then what ends up happening is you can always, of course, delete your model. If you go back to that editing tool, once you've saved it, if you want to click on it there, bet the little pencil beside your title. Yeah, perfect. Then you can actually go here. Oh, it's because we haven't saved it yet. Did we save it? Oh, I know what's happening. Beth, you're on an old cache of the model, so it's you just have to do a hard refresh of your screen. So there, and then when she goes back in, you'll be able to see how you'll be able to delete it. We had to update a little bit of the code last night, so Beth's working on a slightly older cache. So I'll get her to go back in here, so she can go under the pencil, yeah. And then you can delete your model from there. So you can always delete anything in that sense as well. So and make it also, if you do the sharing piece, you can always uncheck the box and it's no longer publicly available via the link that you have.
And Nancy, what about like your email address that you sign up with?
Oh, yes. We find that from the feedback from, users of the software, we often find people forget their passwords. So if they can have sort of a centralized place, like a familiar tool, like your Google or your Facebook, you're used to logging in through those things. All of that is secured through those links as well. So it just adds to people's comfort level and also their ease of use, right? Because they're using familiar ways to access their information.
Thank you both. That was really helpful. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, question about, okay, you see where the word output is? And I believe that you indicated that there were 2 or 3 choices that we could use. What if we have a term that is not in the system? Can we name that something else? Like for example, for your output, I tend to use measurement.
Right.
And you know what I mean? So if I wanted to call that measurement, can I create that, or am I kind of locked into the choices that you have here?
You can create and adapt any words you like here. So on this one, I've gone back to this menu by clicking on the pencil again. And you can actually see now that I have some things in here. It gives me the number that I have. So I have 1 of each of these. I don't have any of these yet.
I got you.
If I click on this, I could change this to measurement. Oh. I can, and now all of those will be called measurement. Or if I want to add something totally different, I can call, whoa, I moved my mouse too quick. You can call it anything you like.
Okay.
And you hit enter, and now we have,
Okay.
Yeah. People, we want it to be flexible. We want it to work with how people work. So whatever, you could use objective, was mentioned earlier, and then, create those SMART objectives, that specific and measurable, quantifiable thing. So whatever you like, any words, any colors.
Okay, awesome. One other question too. I think this is awesome. It's awesomer than I anticipated. So thank you so much. Is there any way that you can add narrative to it? For example, if I'm just walking into this and I hadn't heard a word you said, I wouldn't necessarily know what this picture is without context. So is there some way that you can add narrative, say above it, to kind of describe in summary what's going on, what this thing is that we're looking at? Or do we have to export that and put it somewhere else, and then we can describe it in this other, whatever document we export it to?
So right now, there's not a good way to do it on the on the canvas itself.
Okay.
Like there is in here, you can write a little description, but someone who just looks at the model is not going to see that.
Right.
That's not yeah. So right now there's no way to put like a context or anything box, because these little boxes are very small and they don't get bigger. So if you wrote a long narrative, you'd only see a fraction of it and there'd be a scroll bar, and that would be not good. So maybe that's something we need to think about, Nance, is adding a way to put a narrative box on it.
Actually, so that's a great question. So when that was actually one of the things we discussed early on. So 2016 is a long time ago. So, but I have I have a memory for odd things like this. And so actually, it was actually one of our discussions, because it was one of the components that Beth showed me when she first set up her demo to explain to me the complexities that she was working with. And there was a context piece and also a legend piece. What we ended up finding was we had a legend piece, I think it was in one of the versions, but we found that people didn't use it, because what they were doing was they were using this to collaborate, and then they were looking to export it out. So what people ended up doing, just like you were saying, Valerie, is they take it, they build this sort of collaboratively, and then they export it out, or do like some kind of piece for their presentation, and they put it into the narrative that way. So they put it into a PowerPoint, or whatever that they want to do. So we had just used the description box, because that seemed to be the most that people, when they ended up using it, did, because their narratives existed in other places. But it would be a good way to expand out the presentation mode, so that maybe when you do the presentation, that narrative comes up. And so all of a sudden we'll turn it into, we're ended up being like a PowerPoint version of this in the presentation mode. But yeah, it was only based off of, we wanted to prioritize what people used first. And looking at the data, a lot of people had just really, they didn't fill in any of the descriptions or any of those kinds of pieces in the earlier versions. So we thought, well, we'll focus on this. But hearing you, maybe that's something we can incorporate and build upon with the presentation piece. So I'm taking notes. Thank you.
To the extent that you can make elements, the definition of elements, more rigorous, so that any individual can go back to the definition of the element and decide, is what he or she is thinking about considered to be an input, a resource, an activity, an outcome, a goal, whatever. If you sharpen those up and make them relatively rigorous, it'll help prevent, I suspect, a lot of stumbling.
Okay, and my question, we only have about 4 minutes left. If anyone has a question, feel free to post it, feel free to ask. But my question to you is, what if I'm somebody who is just off the turnip truck, right? And I have no idea how to design a program. I have no idea what a program logic model is or a theory of change. What resources would you recommend that I go to so that I can apply what I know into the design of my logic model?
That's a great question. And it's just getting me thinking, Nancy, in that article section, let's put some links to some good resources. So one that I teach evaluation at a couple universities here in Vancouver. And one of the resources I use, it's super old, but it's got everything, is the University of Wisconsin's extension program. It used to be an online course, and it looks like it's from like the early 90s, because I think it is. And now it's just more like a book like a PDF, I think, that you can read, but I really like it. It's pretty clear, provides some good like little templates and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then actually I just read quite recently an article talking about theory of change, and it's in an open source journal. I think it's the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation, but we can put a link to that, because that would be
awesome.
Yeah, so we can probably put up a few resources. And that also gets to that idea of having those rigorous definitions, so that people kind of have that background of what a logic model is, what it's for, how to do them, so that that can kind of complement having those rigorous definitions. Mm-hmm. Great idea. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you. Thank you. Laura, I haven't seen you in a while. It's great to see you. And let's see, Linda, thank you so much. And Robin, thank you. And Sandra, you made it, I see. Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for showing up. Are there any questions that
Thank you so
have?
much for hosting. Glad to be here.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for this. It was really very interesting.
Nancy and Beth, thank you. Dynamite job. Keep going.
Thank you.
Great, then thank you so much for having us. If you think of something afterwards and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked this question, or you want to know anything, hop back over into the support piece. Jeff just texted me while we were meeting that there's just we use a support tool, and that was just down for a little bit, so that's why the support piece wasn't showing up. But what we'll do is we'll you can just pop over into there. You have the link. We put it into the chat, and you can always just email us there. We'll answer. We usually take about 24 hours. Give us about 24 hours. We're usually pretty good at getting back to you, throughout the day.
Okay.
And we'll put those links too. I think that's such a great idea. I wrote that down too.
Oh, okay, awesome. Okay, so Peter, you saw that, right? Yeah, where the articles, I guess you were reading Peter's note, where the article links that were mentioned. Those are the links. Okay. And then
We'll put them here.
Okay.
Yeah. And Beth, do you have that Wisconsin? I think Peter might want that particular piece, the just the backgrounder.
Let me
so I don't know if you have that.
Yeah, it was the University of Wisconsin Extension Program.
Yeah, we'll find that. And that way.
Yeah.
That way Peter can get started.
Yeah.
Right away. If that's the link he's looking for, yeah.
Yeah, that's my favorite resource. And following that one is the Kellogg Foundation has a really good book.
Those are both great. Thank you.
And I can't find the chat, but I don't know. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Awesome.
Thanks
All
a
right.
lot.
Any other questions, you guys, before we sign off?
Not for me.
Great session.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. We will definitely be sending out other resources, including these. We'll be sending out this recording. So if there's any part you missed or you want to review, you can do that. We'll definitely share links to their website and blog. And then tomorrow, if you can, tune in. We're going to do another demonstration of an application, and we'll focus on the theory of change. So I believe it's Theory Maker, and we'll build upon what we've learned here. All righty. So again, thanks everybody for joining, and you'll be hearing from me real soon because you'll need a recording.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Have a great one.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks so much, Valerie, for having us.
Okay.
No, thank you for the demonstration. It was great.
Great.
All righty. Okay, I'm signing off. Goodbye, everybody.